The Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of Exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, and the Rabbinical Assembly. Today is the fourth day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 4th of Sivan 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Wednesday, May 20th, 2026. We will read special Torah readings for the holiday of Shavuot this coming Shabbat, and it is the 48th day of the Omer. Let's begin. Me'am Loez. We're going to continue to talk about the reading that is going to be done on the first day of Shavuot from Exodus 19, the narrative of the receiving of the Torah on Mount Sinai of the Jewish people. We've really been talking a lot about really the preamble before the Torah is given and sort of the preparations that are required for the people to receive the Torah on Mount Sinai. I think this section is truly beautiful, and I'm really starting to see, honestly, that it really does provide for us instructions on how we are also to receive Torah in our own lives, the conditions by which we receive Torah. And we're going to talk about another one today. We often see when the Jewish people encamp in the wilderness, the plural being used for Israel. They encamped, they moved, they traveled. And it's very clear in the Hebrew that it always is in the plural. When our tradition looks at why this is in the plural and not the singular, right? You could either say Israel is going as one, or they are all going. How the rabbis will often look at they here is they'll say it's written they and multiple people is because there was a lot of disagreement, dissension, argument between the Jews and the people, which is somewhat similar, of course, to our situation in which we find ourselves today. Lots of argument, lots of disagreement between ourselves. But there was at least one point we see that the Jewish people were united. And that is when they stood at the foot of Mount Sinai. And we can actually, according to Rashi, and of course, according to Me'am Loez, where I got this from in particular, we can actually see the change in verb. In the second verse of chapter 19, it says, Vayisu mirfidim vayavo b'midbar Sinai vayichnu b'midbar. Right? So it says first, they, plural, traveled from Refidim, and they came to the wilderness of Sinai, and they, plural, encamped in the wilderness. And then, only then after that, we see Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged Har, that once they actually got to the mountain, the place when they were actually ready to receive the Torah, we see that the encampment in the same sentence actually switches to singular. Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged Har. And even Rashi there, based on a Mechilta, an early halachic midrash, says, as one man and with one mind, but all their other encampments were made in a murmuring spirit and in spirit of dissension. It's a very old rabbinic tradition that really, in order, right before the Jews received the Torah on Mount Sinai, what was unique about that situation is that there was peace, that people were able to get along with each other, people were able to see each other, people were able to make room for each other. And only by doing so within Israel, of the Jewish people able to make room for each other and able to be in relationship with each other, able to actually create real peace and not dissension and argument, which is, of course, so common in our reality today, common in their reality as well, apparently. Only then were they actually able to receive Torah. Now, obviously, this is a very hard thing to do. Imagine the whole entire Jewish world agreeing with each other. That's why the moment at Mount Sinai was just so momentous and incredible. That the Jewish people were able to be at peace, and by doing so, were able to receive the Torah. But I also think this is, and it's hard for me to imagine this sort of happening again anytime soon. That like all of a sudden Jews are able to get along, all Jews are able to get along with each other, and we could sort of all receive Torah because of that. And I think, in a real way, we are hurt by that as a nation of Jewish people of the Jews. That we don't receive Torah in the optimum way because we're not able to get along with each other as we should. But I also think that it's sort of a pipe dream at this point to make sure that everybody gets along with each other, right? We can work and take small steps towards that, but that's actually a very hard, difficult, very complicated, almost impossible to achieve reality. But I think for each of us in where we find ourselves, I think it also helps us to understand how we should come to Torah. if we're coming to Torah in order to prove somebody else wrong, or in order to argue about something, or in order to prove the rightness of myself and the wrongness of somebody else, or even the rightness of them and the wrongness of myself, whatever it may be, if coming forward with some kind of agenda to prove something, we're never going to be able to receive Torah. But if we come with a sense of peace, a sense that we want to use this so that we can be in relationship to other Jews and to serve Hashem through these things, and that to really try to become better people, to not try to be bal machloket, to not be people who are constantly arguing and yelling at each other, and being very extreme and stubborn in our views, but rather to try to be receptive and try to build community and build a relationship with whoever we are around at the particular time, especially if they're Jews. Then what we're told is we're actually able to receive Torah. That actually is a requirement for being able to receive Torah, is being able to look at it in that way. And I think that, of course, tells us a lot about Torah and is certainly prescriptive for our behavior today. Mishnah Torah. We'll continue learning the laws of Lashon HaRa, or bad speech, using our speech adversely as a transgression. And we're going to continue talking about that today and create some, rules about that. So this one comes out of the third halacha of chapter 7, right after the halacha we learned in yesterday's episode. So our sages actually say that, not halacha 3, halacha 4. Sorry about that. I wanted to introduce you to a concept today that I think is really helpful in our society, which is called avak Lashon HaRa, or the dust of Lashon HaRa. And that's going to be the main concept that Rambam speaks today about in his halacha. You know, a lot of the things that we do and the hairy situations we sort of get into in terms of speech are not fully transgressions in themselves. They're like dicey situations. I could probably get a question every day on, should I say this, Rabbi? Should I not say this? There are a lot of sort of in-between situations, and a lot of those in-between situations that many of us think are actually okay are considered within rabbinic understanding to be what's called avak Lashon HaRa, not actual Lashon HaRa, but the dust of Lashon HaRa. So he's going to explain what that means here. So Rambam says, for example, a person who says, "Who will tell so-and-so to continue acting as he does now?" Or, "Do not talk about so-and-so. I do not want to say what happened," or the like. So these are examples the Rambam gives of where you're not really actually saying anything bad about anyone, but you're sort of hinting at it, right? You never actually said it, but you said it, right? And those who understand will understand in your language of what you're saying. So we do these things all the time to avoid, because we feel bad, like, oh, I really can't say this bad thing. It's considered Lashon HaRa, so I'm going to like hint at it because I really want to say it. So I'm going to just hint at it, not really say it, and maybe technically not transgressing. And in some ways you're right? In some ways it's not a full transgression of Lashon HaRa, but it's considered avak Lashon HaRa. And avak Lashon HaRa, the dust of Lashon HaRa, is also something the Talmud tells us to stay away from over and over again. So this is considered avak Lashon HaRa, the dust of Lashon HaRa, and something we should definitely stay away from. He continues, a second example is, similarly, it is also considered the dust of Lashon HaRa when someone speaks favorably about a colleague in the presence of his enemies, for this will surely prompt them to speak disparagingly about him. So this is actually a case when you're speaking positively about someone, but you're speaking positively about someone around somebody who doesn't like this person, or is going to very much disagree with what you're saying. And when you do this, that most likely this person's probably going to go home and say some horrible things about this person. It's going to enrage the person you're talking to. It's not going to do anything productive. And in the end, it's going to actually cause more slander, more Lashon HaRa about this person. So actually, by speaking positively about someone around someone that does not like them, it is actually also considered avak Lashon HaRa, meaning you're not actually saying something bad about the person, but by doing so, you're causing Lashon HaRa. You're causing something bad by what you're saying. So very, very important. Now, this is very different if you really think that you're going to be able to convince the person to get over their bad feelings and to make up with each other. You can basically do many, many things in order to create peace in this world. The halacha continues. Similarly, to be condemned is a person who relates Lashon HaRa in frivolity and jest, as if he were speaking with hatred, as if he were not speaking with hatred. I'm sorry. This was also mentioned. So he basically says, like, oftentimes we say, well, I'm not trying to hurt the person. This is all in good fun and we're just having a good time and we're just ribbing people, right? That's what he's talking about here and saying, and I love this verse he brings from Solomon to prove it from Proverbs, as a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death and says, I'm only joking. Right. And that's exactly, I think, how our society works today. We see that so often where it's like, I'm just joking. This is all in good jest, but here I'm going to say these awful, terrible things about another human being. So this, of course, also is avak Lashon HaRa, right? Which means it's the dust of Lashon HaRa. Very, very important. And then finally, also to be condemned is someone who speaks Lashon HaRa about a colleague slyly, pretending to be innocently telling a story without knowing that it is harmful. When he's reproved, he excuses himself by saying, I did not know that the story was harmful or that so-and-so was involved, right? To sort of pretend that you're innocent, that you don't really know what's going on. You're just telling something that you saw and you don't mean to really harm someone, right? This would still be considered an instance of gossip because you're relating a story about somebody else. But if you pretend that you didn't know that it was actually bad or that this was going to cause harm in any way, it still counts as at least avak Lashon HaRa, or the dust of Lashon HaRa. All these things are, as the rabbi said, as Rambam says, to be condemned, and some things we can stay away from. And I think like doing this and taking these in between categories and saying, okay, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this unless there's a really good reason. I'm not going to be a part of this. And even though it's entertaining and it might not technically be Lashon HaRa, it's still avak Lashon HaRa. It's still the dust of Lashon HaRa, and therefore we should stay away from it. Menorat HaMaor. We'll continue learning Menorat HaMaor on the section of Shavuot. We're going to still continue talking about a subject that we began talking about in yesterday's episode. If you didn't listen to it, it's okay. What we talked about in yesterday's episode is the idea that Shavuot as a holiday is called Shavuot, or weeks. And it's defined in its natural essence as being after 7 weeks of counting. And it's thought in Judaism that 8, or the number after 7, is it signifies things that are beyond the physical world, that are beyond the things that we could see in our universe, but beyond that, right? There are 7 days of the week. There's a lot of sevens in our world. One beyond that is one beyond the perceived existence. So Shavuot is the holiday that is one beyond the 7 by 7, right? 7 weeks of 7 days. One more than that is 50. So this is going to continue on that beautiful theme that was mentioned. This is a famous idea about the idea that the luchot were charut al haluchot, that the Torah was inscribed upon the luchot. But the word cherut, which is the word that's used, or charut, sounds a lot like the word cherut, which means, well, freedom. And this is actually a midrash that is brought in the Talmud itself. Al tikre charut, engraved, but rather cherut, that it was freedom on the tablets, not engraved on the tablets. And he's going to interpret that in the idea of what we've been trying to say, is that by actually observing the Torah and learning the Torah, by fixing ourselves upon its values, we actually rise above the perceived reality of the world around us. That in the end, everything comes from Hashem. Everything is fully dependent on Hashem. There is no independent force outside of Hashem. Everything else is dependent upon it. So by trying to live our lives through Torah and its values, we actually end up rising above the perceived reality we see around us to be connected to the true one source of life. I've honestly felt this peace a lot with Torah, especially during these rocky times that we're all going through, as it's a dark time in our world around us, that the Torah has given me, at least personally, so much peace, and it really does feel like freedom. And it's funny because the Torah is filled with so many rules and 613 different mitzvot and all these different things that we need to do. It, if you looked at it, it probably makes our life actually a little harder. You have to work really hard to fulfill the Torah. But actually, in my sense of how it actually makes me feel when I'm learning it and focused on it and trying to do it and live my life around it, I actually feel like beautifully free from so many toxic things in our society today, and able to rise above so many of the challenges I think that so many are facing in the world. It gives us so much strength and so much freedom. And I think that's why in the end, I always say, we always say Pesach, Zman Cherutenu, is the time of our freedom. And the big question is like, yeah, we went out from slavery, but only to go to Mount Sinai and receive the Torah, where we're getting a bunch of laws. We go from being servant of Pharaoh to servant of God, but we're still a servant. So it's kind of a weird thing to say, Zman Cherutenu. What does that mean? This is a time of our freedom. And I think this is it comes really from this, that instead of serving sort of dependent values or dependent things, illusions, things that are passing by the day, Torah enables us to actually serve truth and serve things that are actually beyond and transcendent from this world. And in doing so, help us to live with eternal purpose, which I think for so many of us are missing today in our world. It's the source of so much anxiety and depression and sadness, to not feel like we're living lives with meaning and connection. And that's exactly what the Torah does. It gives us the freedom that we're able to actually live by what is real and not is what is a passing fancy or some kind of fashion of the moment, but what is truly eternal. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.